This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, real MVPs? Ricky Widmer here, along with the Mark Weber.
Dub them ease.
And we are back here on the Onside Kick here on Most Valuable Podcast, your, I can say it again, Mark, professional football podcast, not just the NFL, because we'll see how long this second league sticks around. Because when we talked about the AAF, or the Alliance, it didn't really last that long.
It lasted longer than it initially was supposed to.
It lasted longer than we thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, it lasted that they almost failed in week 2 and didn't fail until, I think, like week 7.
Yeah, and got emergency money.
So, hey,
it was also
progress.
funny because we had Z on the fast break. He was talking about like how bad Arizona franchises has been. And he's like, great, the hot shots were actually good in the league, folks.
Well, they shouldn't be good. That's the problem.
But we are talking today NFL and XFL. That's why I bring up the professional football and just not NFL. I'm going to be diving in. Our first one, Mark sent me the email after I sent the topics of like, oh, the 2020 draft already. As we are going to talk about who will be the number 1 overall pick. Way too early, but we're still going to talk about it. Then we're going to look at NFL teams, which teams are under the most pressure this upcoming season. And then the XFL. Will this new XFL be a success or will it be a failure? But before we jump into everything, make sure to check out patreon.com/Most Valuable Podcast. That is how you can help us do what we do each and every day, each and every week for you guys. But also in 2019, our biggest crowdfunding goal is going to be getting a new studio. We're in a little tiny box of a room, and we want to have more space to do better things for you guys, have more accessible stuff, and we do that through patreon.com/Most Valuable Podcast. You could be bronze, silver, or gold level tiers and be rewarded for helping us reach our goals to make the product better for you guys, the watchers, the viewers, and the listeners on podcast services around the world. But Mark, let's dive in. The 2020 draft, we haven't even been able to say goodbye properly to the 2019 draft, and we're already diving into the 2020 draft. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up today is Todd McShay did his way too early mock draft where he took Pro Football Insider, their projected ranking of how the teams will lay out. He did that draft. Then there was also a segment on Get Up either this morning or yesterday morning where they talked about should teams tank for Tua Tagovailoa because he's presumed to be the number 1 overall pick. And it got me thinking. I'm like, you know what? I should do one as well. I am in the process of it. It is called the way too early because this is way too early in front of the way too early to be thinking about this draft.
It is very early.
But the thing I want to ask you is who's going to be the number 1 pick? Because to me, there's 2 sides right now. There's number 1, which is, will Tua even be the number 1 ranked quarterback when we get done with the college season, when we get to next April? And number 2, will the team at number 1 even need a quarterback? Because right now, the projection is the Miami Dolphins, and they probably or maybe traded for their franchise quarterback in Josh Rosen this April.
The hard thing with a way too early mock draft really is the fact that you think about the players that you're going to know who are going to be those kind of game-changing players, a quarterback, a wide receiver.
Bless you.
Thank you. Those players are going to be quarterbacks. They're going to be wide receivers. They're going to be running backs, maybe. Yeah. You know, I'm just thinking the players that you know about or a pass rusher, those are those big standout guys who make highlight reels. And that's why you know about them. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be that best player who really should be drafted at number 1 overall. So, although oftentimes young quarterbacks do get taken number 1 overall. But I just look at that and I see all these things because you're right. You see Tua going all the time in these way too early mock drafts just because of the fact that, well, we know who Tua is. We think he's a good quarterback, and we're assuming that he'll have a good year next year too. But as I always like to say, look at Matt Barkley as an example. just because you were the number one prospect one year does not mean you're going to be number one or even taken in the first round the next year. So it's going to be tough, but when you really look at who are going to be those top teams, and I know this is a point that you want to bring up too, I don't know that they really want to draft quarterbacks.
Well, and I was waiting to see which one you wanted to dive into first. We'll dive into that one. We're in my way too early. I will be honest. I will spoil it. Tua is not the number one overall pick for mine. I am finishing it up, so you'll have to follow me on Twitter at Ricky Widmer. I'm going to tweet out when that is on mostvaluablepodcasts.com. It'll probably be the next week or so that I get that done. But I'll be honest, Tua's not my number one because I look at it and the Dolphins, well, if Josh Rosen plays well, they're not going to draft a quarterback. Now, obviously, if Tua's really good, a team will probably trade up with the Dolphins to get him at number one.
But we're going to ignore that.
Yeah, ignoring trades, the Dolphins will probably not need a quarterback. The Cardinals, they just drafted Kyler Murray. Are they going to go back to are they going to do the Brownsy move and go back to the well the next year? I don't think so. The Broncos, yeah, Drew Lock was a second-round pick, but he's a guy that I was listening to Peter King on Pro Football Talk, and he was talking about Denver. And when they he said when they traded back from 10, because he talked to John Elway after the first round, when they traded back from 10, they were ready to take Devin Bush. Apparently, they didn't take Devin Bush because they didn't feel he was the perfect fit for Vic Fangio's defensive system. That's why they traded back, even though the Steelers took Devin Bush and got Noah Fant later. And then the second round, after they took Dalton Reisner, I think it was Dalton Reisner, that next pick, they were like, well, Drew Lock is still there. Yeah. Let's trade up and get, this is a guy that we would have taken at 10, and we're going to get him in the second round at, I believe, 41?
I don't think they would have taken him at 10.
Well, he was a guy that on many boards, even on their boards, would have been like, hey, he's in the discussion here at 10, and we're going to get him at 41. It's the quarterback you really like at a value that is it's a no-brainer to get him here. So they're a team that I don't think goes back to the quarterback well. Drew Haskins in Washington. Dwayne Haskins. I combined Locke and Haskins there. Dwayne Haskins, he ain't getting replaced after year one, if he even starts, because there's Case Keenum out there, and there are some people that think he shouldn't start. So that means, to me, the first team that you could even say would think about Tua is the Oakland Raiders at 5.
I was going to say, I can only imagine two teams drafting a quarterback of teams who I expect to be at the bottom. That would be the Oakland Raiders. If they have another bad year, they might say, you know what, maybe Derek Carr is not the answer. Maybe we look somewhere else. Nobody in this organization has really any tie to Derek Carr. The other one's going to be Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bruce Arians comes in and says, I think I can work with Jameis. If he gets there and it doesn't work, he's going to say, I was wrong. I couldn't work with Jameis. Let me now get my quarterback.
Throw the Bengals in there, too. I'll throw the Bengals
Probably,
as a maybe.
Because they don't really have any ties to Andy Dalton either.
And Andy Dalton's contract year is next year. Not this year, 2019. 2020 will be his contract year.
I can just see Andy Dalton getting a little bit more and sticking around a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really don't think there's going to be too many. But, we'll see with injuries. Maybe San Francisco, Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt again.
Maybe.
And they're going to say, you know what, it's time to do something else. Maybe one of these other quarterbacks is going to retire. Somebody gets hurt. Who knows what's going to happen? But of the teams I expect to be towards the top of the draft, in that top 5 kind of range, top 10 range, I don't necessarily know that many of them are going to want quarterbacks.
The one I'm going to throw out there, because at first you said injury, and I was going to say the Carolina Panthers, but Carolina did draft Will Grier later on. I'm not saying Will Grier's like a Drew Lock that could come in year
But I also
one.
don't expect them to move on from Cam even if he gets hurt again.
Yeah, that's something that is unique. And the thing I wanted to throw out, though, is what about the Lions? The Lions, smokescreen or not, flirted with, I think it was a smokescreen because they didn't do it, but the whole, we could take a quarterback.
Yeah.
Could they be a team? If they're in the top 10 again, do they look at options but going younger rather than a Matthew Stafford
I don't know.
who would still be under, he has a potential out after 2020, but doesn't become a unrestricted free agent until 2023.
Yeah, I don't know about that, only because Matthew Stafford, without a doubt, is the best part of that team. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's the best thing they have.
Yeah.
And
he's the face of that franchise.
Yeah, and he's a really good quarterback. The problem is they barely ever give him anything else to work with. And then earlier in his career, the issue was injuries, and he's kind of gotten over that for the most part. So I don't expect them to really move on. But with a guy like Matt Patricia, if this is another bad year, he might sit there and pull kind of like a Mark Trestman and go, well, hold on a second, guys. It's not me. It's the quarterback. We got to get me a new quarterback. Give me one more year. He might have a little bit of desperation kind of moment and try and pin the blame on somebody else. Bench Eli for Geno Smith type of scenario.
Yeah. Here's the other thing I want to bring up, though, and this was the other pot of it with the whole Tua thing, because the conversation I mentioned they had on First Take was, should teams tank for Tua Tagovailoa? And the whole point that was brought up was, first off, they were like, Tua wasn't even the best quarterback last year. The best quarterback was Trevor Lawrence, who was a year younger than Tua. He goes, and this is Greenberg also said, when you look at the games where Tua threw interceptions, those were NFL-level defenses. Like the first interception he threw, LSU, they had guys in that backfield that are like Greedy Williams, who's now in the NFL, who we had as a top 10 prospect.
Who's going to be a starter probably day one.
Probably for the Cleveland Browns. But I mean, you look at the quarterbacks coming into this year, and for me, right now, would I put Tua as my number one? You're absolutely right. He's a guy that's thrown 43 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year, and had 11.2 yards per throw. But at the same time, it's Alabama, and Alabama's usually really good at college football. Then there's like the other core, like Justin Herbert, I think, is a guy that competes with him at the top, where Herbert could have came out this year, came back for one more year at Oregon. He's going to play with his brother, who is a freshman tight end for the Oregon Ducks. He's one that, watching his film, reminded me a lot of Cam Newton with how he throws, how he runs with his body, the way he scrambles, reminded me of Cam Newton and how he ran at Auburn, but also with the Carolina Panthers. Then Jake Fromm and Jacob Eason, two of the, one's an ex-Georgia guy, one's a current Georgia guy. Jake Fromm has kind of fallen from grace since he exploded onto the scene. Jacob Eason hasn't played in 2 years. Has only thrown 7 passes since 2016. So we'll see about that. And then for me, the ultimate wild card. He's no longer at Alabama. He's now an Oklahoma Sooner, gets to work with Lincoln Riley, and he's going to have a nice receiving core at Oklahoma, Jalen Hurts. Yeah.
So the quarterback thing is not a sure thing, and people, surprise everybody and just kind of explode onto the on the playing field as well. And sometimes you have guys that were really good one year and then they just kind of fall off. You also have the NFL's other obsession, as we like to talk about quarterbacks, is the pass rush, a defensive end. We just saw a guy in Joey Bosa go number 2 overall, but the guy who kind of replaced him early because he had to, because Bosa was like, peace out, with Chase Young is kind of one of the other, he's probably the most popular defensive end to be talked about in all of these kind of early looks. So you're going to have a guy like that who, once again, Ohio State, it's a defense that always produces good pass rushers. The NFL likes to, go out and get these Ohio State players. There's going to be one of those probably ready for the draft as well after this year.
The other thing I want to throw out there, too, because Chase Young's a guy I actually have very high on my board, or way, way, way early on. And that's just because I feel like if the teams end up like Pro Football Outsider has them, the Dolphins, for example, at 1, would rather go with a Chase Young than a Tua. Let me get that pass rusher to get after Tom Brady rather than another quarterback when I have Josh Rosen. And, of course, hindsight, we're not there yet. We got to see how Josh Rosen plays in Miami, which, to me, better roster than Arizona offensively. I know that David Johnson, like they win the running back because David Johnson's better than what Miami has, but I'll say the wide receivers are better. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald, yeah, I had him high in my fantasy rankings last year, and Sean likes to give me shit for that. But like Christian Kirk was injured. Larry Fitzgerald was good, but he can't be the only one. And Devonta Parker was good with Jay Cutler before Jay Cutler was like, Audi, I'm out of here. I'm not going to play for the Dolphins anymore. And just to look at like last year's way too early, Todd McShay and his had Ed Oliver as the number one pick. Did he end up being the number one pick?
Definitely not.
You and I were actually the closest. You closer than I because I was an asshole and called him by his brother's name at the
There you
time.
go.
Both of us had Nick Bosa as the number one pick in the way too early.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, I mean, I don't mean to pat ourselves on the back, but you look at our way too early that we did last year, Bosa was a top 10 pick. Ed Oliver, first round pick. Jonah Williams, first round pick. Greedy Williams should have been a first round pick. Clellan Ferrell, Rashawn Gary, Dexter Lawrence, all these guys, really high picks. The only ones that were off were Trey Adams, because he came back to Washington this year, and then Greg Little fell out of the first round, and then I had Deebo Samuel, who was not in the first round either. Besides that, you and I hit guys that were going to be in the first round, ended up being there. Maybe not exactly top 10, but they were in that first round. But going back to what you were saying with the pass rush, if I had to put my money on it right now, unless there's a huge trade, I think Chase Young's the number one pick next year.
Or, I mean, if it is, Miami and Josh Rosen's just absolutely terrible, there are things that can happen with it. But as things stand right now, yeah, I mean, I think he's the kind of obvious pick because of the fact that NFL loves pass rush. The first overall pick, it's something that you kind of look for quarterbacks, pass rushers. Those are typically two of the top positions you're going to go for. Occasionally offensive linemen, but you have a really good one. You have one that has performed really well. He's the right size that you want for an NFL pass rusher. Plays in a good conference on a good team. You're going to like what you see. And if quarterbacks are not a high desperate need, we're like, oh, there's 5 teams that need quarterbacks. Guess everyone's going to take one. Then, yeah, you got to go with the pass rush.
What do you think quarterback-wise? Is there anyone that could... Because right now on everyone's board, Tua is just naturally up there. Could any of the guys listed in the top 5, Herbert, Fromm, Eason, Jalen Hurts, compete with Tua? Because to me, I threw a tweet out, and part of me was joking, part of me wasn't. It was kind of one of those like, hey, if you don't like it, I'm joking. If you like it, dude, I totally wasn't joking.
Yeah.
But I threw out, like, you look at Jalen Hurts. And he was a really good, I'm going to say really good quarterback at Alabama. Now he's at Oklahoma, where the last 2 players, quarterbacks that came out of Oklahoma, first-round picks in the NFL draft. And I threw out, like, what if he was the number one pick? Like, that'd be crazy. Oklahoma having back-to-back-to-back number one overalls. And Sean replied to it in natural fashion, said that if Jalen Hurts is the number one pick, he will move out of the country. So right there, I think Jalen Hurts will then be the number one pick. Because whenever Sean bets something, it's usually wrong. But do any of these guys have a chance or will dethrone Tua in this draft season, looking at it way too early?
I'm going to pick anybody. It's going to be Justin Herbert. He's got a lot of the same skills. He's got really high upside. So there's things that you kind of look for and things that you like. And if he had gone in this draft, there's a good chance he
was top 5.
Yeah, there's a good chance he was a top 5, probably second quarterback off the board. Well, maybe not because of the great Daniel Jones. But
hey, maybe New York falls in love with Justin Herbert and Daniel Jones never wears a Giant jersey.
No, couldn't be. Couldn't be.
But he wasn't coached by Eli. He wasn't coached by a Manning guy.
So
Cutliffe's a Manning guy, Mark.
I just look at it and I have to think that this is a team, this is a player who, depending on what he does in this season, can really lift himself up. Because part of the thing with Tua, too, is he's got all the talent in the world around him. Mm-hmm. And
well, it's a powerhouse factory.
Exactly. So that's part of the reason why I always say I am not going to ever trust an Alabama quarterback because they could be terrible and they'll still look pretty good.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that also I'm kind of surprised you haven't thrown out there about Alabama quarterbacks is when they get to the NFL, how do they usually look?
Not good.
Not good because they don't have the talent around them like they did at Oklahoma. And I mean,
especially if you're going to go number 1 overall.
The point I really liked that was made in the Get Up segment that I watched today was with Tua, not saying he's a bad quarterback, but when you look at it, he was like a gangbuster out of the front of the year, but he was playing Louisville, Arkansas State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M was the first ranked team he played. Didn't throw that first interception until I said LSU, but LSU was a ranked SEC team.
Yep.
Then another ranked SEC, almost top 15, Mississippi State made him throw an interception. But then in the SEC championship game, he didn't look amazing against Georgia. I know they got the win 35-28, but he only threw 1 touchdown, 2 INTs. And then that national championship game they lost, he obviously wasn't the best quarterback out there because Trevor Lawrence was the best quarterback out there for Clemson, and that's why Clemson rolled in that national championship game. I know that the thing I will say is that he did play better than Kyler Murray in the Oklahoma game, but I feel like, yet again, Oklahoma's defense was nothing to write home about. So really that was Kyler versus Tua mano-a-mano.
Yeah, for sure.
Clemson was, hey, both these defenses is pretty good. And Tua just didn't, he scored 2 touchdowns, but he didn't live up to snuff against that Clemson defense. So to kind of end this, not holding you to it, but if you had to pick right now, who would you predict to be the number 1 overall pick when we get to next April?
Pass rusher, Chase Young.
Yeah, that's who I'm going to go with also. I mean, spoiling it for my article, but yeah, Chase Young. I just feel like the teams that'll be at the top, overall across the board, all 32 NFL teams, there's just not a lot of teams right now that I could see needing a quarterback. And it's going to be interesting to see. The Raiders will be an interesting team because they've got 2 picks. Bears will probably be another like
32.
20s pick. Yeah, 32, 16-0. But they'll also probably have a high pick because of their own, depending on what Antonio Brown and those additions bring to them this year. Muscle Hamster will be back because of Isaiah Crowell.
Love it.
Tearing his Achilles, I think, is what he tore.
Yeah, Achilles.
His Achilles, so he's out for the year, and the Muscle Hamster will be back for the Oakland Raiders, soon to be Las Vegas Raiders. That's what they're going to be. It looked weird on a mock draft seeing Las Vegas Raiders for the first time.
Yeah.
Because that's what they'll be when they draft next year in Las Vegas.
Just not right.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Is Tua the clear number 1 pick? If not, who are you taking? Let us know down below.